All right, hey everyone. It is, well, now it's Friday, but it's Thursday night. Time for Conan. We're finishing Queen of the Black Coast, starting with part 3. We read parts 1 and 2 on Tuesday. What happened there? Conan, in the best form of in media res, he jumped aboard a merchant vessel, became a strong man, killed a bunch of pirates, got a pirate wife, raided some coasts, and now he's in the jungle looting it for his pirate wife. And in the jungle, a bat creature defiled all the water on their ship, so now Conan led a party of pirates into the jungle looking for fresh water. But Conan fell prey to the Black Lotus plant, which has put him to sleep. Let's jump right in after I cough. Okay. Part 3, The Horror in the Jungle. I don't think you should have a period there. That's a title. Anyways. Was it a dream that knighted Lotus brought? Get it? I got it. Was it a dream the knighted Lotus brought? Then cursed? C-U-R-S-E-D, not C-U-R-S-T. The hell? Then cursed the dream that bought my sluggish life, and cursed, with a T, each laggard hour that does not see. Hot blood drip blackly from the crimson knife. Complete. Starting off strong. Maybe cursed with a T is a word. I don't know. What do I know? I'm just reading it. First there was the blackness of an utter void, with the cold winds of cosmic space blowing through it. Then shapes, vague, monstrous, and evanescent, rolled in dim paranoia. I'm sorry, I just cracked up remembering the song and the memes from Evanescence, Wake Me Up, which is ironically fitting for this. Then shapes, vague, monstrous, and evanescence, rolled in dim panorama through the expanse of nothingness, as if the darkness were taking material form. The winds blew and a vortex formed, a whirling pyramid of roaring blackness. From it grew shape and dimension, capital S, capital D, proper words here. Then suddenly, like clouds dispersing, the darkness rolled away on either hand, and a huge city of dark green stone rose on the bank of a wide river, flowing through an limitable? A plane without limits. Got it. I had to think through that one for a second. Don't know why. Makes sense. Through this city moved beings of alien configuration. Think of unlimited would have been better, but Robert E. Howard is a bastard poet, so he likes playing with words. Cast in the mold of humanity, they were distinctly not men. They were winged and of heroic proportions, not a branch on the mysterious stalk of evolution that culminated in man, but the ripe blossom of an alien tree, separate and apart from that stalk. Aside from their wings and physical appearance, they resemble man only as man in his highest form resembles the great apes. In spiritual, aesthetic, and intellectual development, they were superior to man, as man is superior to the gorilla. But when they reared their colossal city, man's primal ancestors had not risen from the slime of the primordial seas. These beings were mortal, as are all things built of flesh and blood. They lived, loved, and died, though the individual span of life was enormous. Then, after uncounted millions of years, the change, capital C, began. The vista shimmered and wavered, like a picture thrown on a windblown curtain. Over the city and the land, the ages flowed as waves flow over a beach, and each wave brought alterations. Somewhere on the planet, the magnetic centers were shifting. The great glaciers and ice fields were withdrawing toward the new poles. The littoral of the great river altered. Plains turned into swamps that stank with reptilian life, where fertile meadows had rolled, forests reared up, growing into dank jungles. The changing ages wrought on the inhabitants of the city as well. They did not migrate to fresher lands. Reasons inexplicable to humanity held them to the ancient city in their doom. And as that once rich and mighty land sank deeper and deeper into the black mire of the sunless jungle, so into the chaos of squalling jungle life sank the people of the city. Terrific convulsions shook the earth. The nights were lurid with spouting volcanoes that fringed the dark horizons with red pillars. After an earthquake that shook down the outer walls and highest towers of the city and caused the river to run black for days with some lethal substance spewed up from the subterranean depths, a frightful chemical change became apparent in the waters the folks had drunk for millenniums uncountable. Many died who drank of it, and in those who lived, the drinking wrought change, subtle, gradual, and grisly. In adapting themselves to the changing conditions, they had sunk far below their original level. But the lethal waters altered them even more horribly from generation to more bestial generation. They had been winged gods. They who had been winged gods became pinioned demons with all that, like the right window. There we go. With all that remained of their ancestors' vast knowledge, distorted and perverted and twisted into ghastly paths. As they had risen higher than mankind might dream, so they sank lower than man's maddest nightmares reach. They died fast, by cannibalism and horrible feuds fought out in the murk of the midnight jungle. And at last, among the lichen-grown ruins of their city, only a single shape lurked. A stunted, abhorrent perversion of nature. Then, for the first time, humans appeared, dark-skinned, hawk-faced men in copper and leather harness, bearing bows, the warriors of prehistoric Stygia. There were only 50 of them, and they were haggard and gaunt, with starvation and prolonged effort, stained and scratched with jungle wandering, with blood-crusted bandages that told of fierce fighting. In their minds was a tale of warfare and defeat, in flight before a stronger tribe, which drove them ever southward until they lost themselves in the green ocean of jungle and river. Exhausted, they laid down among the ruins where red blossoms that bloom but once a century waved in the full moon, and sleep fell upon them, and as they slept, a hideous shape crept red-eyed from the shadows and performed weird and awful rites about and above each sleeper. The moon hung in the shadowy sky, painting the jungle red and black. Above the sleepers, braces, make it hard to say that. Above the sleepers glimmered the crimson blossoms like splashes of blood. Then the moon went down, and the eyes of the necromancer were red jewels in the ebony of night. When dawn spread its white veil over the river, there were no men to be seen, only a hairy winged horror that squatted in the center of a ring of 50 great spotted hyenas that pointed quivering muzzles to the ghastly sky and howled like souls in hell. Then scene followed scene so swiftly that each tripped over the heels of its predecessor. Water. There was a confusion of movement, a writhing and melting of lights and shadows. Against a background of black jungle, green stone ruins, and murky river, black men came up the river in long boats with skulls grinning on the prows, or stole stooping through trees, spear in hand. Lost my place. As usual. There we go. They fled screaming through the dark from red eyes and slavering fangs. Howls of dying men shook the shadows. Stealthy feet padded through the gloom. Vampire eyes blazed redly. There were grisly feasts beneath the moon, across whose red disk a bat-like shadow incessantly swept. Then abruptly, etched clearly in contrast to these impressionistic glimpses, around the jungled point in the whitening dawn swept a long galley, thronged thronged with shining ebon figures, and in the bows, get that damn again, got me last time too. And in the bows stood a white-skinned ghost in blue steel. It was at this point that Conan first realized that he was dreaming. Until that instant, he had no consciousness of individual existence. But as he saw himself treading the boards of the Tigris, he recognized both the existence and the dream, although he did not awaken. Even as he wondered, the scene shifted abruptly to a jungle glade where Ngora and 19 black spearmen stood, as if awaiting someone. Even as he realized that was he for whom they waited, a horror swooped down from the skies, and their stolidity? I don't know that word. Stolidity was broken by yells of fear. I think it means solidity, like they're standing in union. Stolidity, that's a new one to me. Was broken by yells of fear. Like men maddened by terror, they threw away their weapons and raced wildly through the jungle, pressed close by the slavering monstrosity that flapped its wings above them. Chaos and confusion followed this vision, during which Conan feebly struggled to awake. Dimly, he seemed to see himself lying under a nodding cluster of... Dimly, he seemed to see himself lying under a nodding cluster of black blossoms. While from the blushes, a hideous shape crept toward him. With a savage effort, he broke the unseen bonds which held him to his dreams and started upright. Bewilderment was in the glare he cast about him. Near him swayed the dusky lotus, and he hastened to draw away from it. In the spongy soil nearby, there was a track as if an animal had put out a foot, preparatory to emerging from the bushes, then had withdrawn it. It looked like the spoor of an unbelievably large hyena. He yelled for Ngura. Primordial silence brooded over the jungle, in which his yells sounded brittle and hollow as mockery. He could not see the sun, but his wilderness-trained instinct told him the day was near its end. A panic rose in him at the thought that he had lain senseless for hours. He hastily followed the tracks of the spearmen, which lay plain in the damp loam before him. They ran in single file, and he soon emerged into a glade, to stop short, the skin crawling between his shoulders as he recognized it as the glade he had seen in his lotus-drugged dream. Shields and spears lay scattered about as if dropped in headlong flight. And from the tracks which led out of the glade and deeper into the fastnesses, Conan knew what the spearmen had fled wildly. The footprints overlay one another, they weaved blindly through the trees, and with startling suddenness, the hastening Cimmerian came out of the jungle onto a hill-like rock which sloped steeply to break off abruptly in a sheer precipice 40 feet high, and something crouched on the brink. Heck. That's better. I don't know why. Earlier this month, the randomly got a sprain in my neck. Alright. At first, Conan thought it to be a great black gorilla. Then he saw that it was a giant black man that crouched ape-like, long arms dangling, froth dripping from the loose lips. It was not until, with a sobbing cry, the creature lifted huge hands and rushed toward him that Conan recognized Ngura. The black man gave no heed to Conan's shout as he charged, eyes rolled up to display the whites, teeth gleaming, face an inhuman mask. Casual racism comparing the black man to a gorilla, but okay. It is what it is. It was written in the 30s, unfortunately. With his skin crawling with the horror that madness always instills in the sane, Conan passed his sword through the black man's body. Then, avoiding the hooked hands that clawed at him as Ngura sank down, he strode to the edge of the cliff. For an instant, he stood looking down into the jagged rocks below, where lay Ngura's spearmen in limp, distorted attitudes that told of crushed limbs and splintered bones. Not one moved. A cloud of huge black flies buzzed loudly above the blood-splashed stones. The ants had already begun to gnaw at the corpses, and on the trees about sat birds of prey, and a jackal, looking up and seeing the man on the cliff, slunk furtively away. For a little space, Conan stood motionless. Then he wheeled and ran back the way he had come, flinging himself with reckless haste through the tall grass and bushes, hurdling creepers that sprawled snake-like across his path. His sword swung low in his right hand, and an unaccustomed pallor tinged his dark face. The silence that reigned in the jungle was not broken. The sun had set, and great shadows rushed upward from the slime of the black earth. Through the gigantic shades of lurking death and grim desolation, Conan was a speeding glimmer of scarlet and blue steel. No sound in all the solitude was heard except his own quick panting as he burst from the shadows into the grim twilight of the river shore. He saw the galley shouldering the rotten wharf, the ruins reeling drunkenly in the gray half-light. And here and there among the stones were spots of raw bright color, as if a careless hand had splashed with a crimson brush. And Conan looked on death and destruction. Before him lay his spearmen, nor did they rise to salute him. From the jungle edge to the riverbank, among the rotting pillars and along the broken piers they lay, torn and mangled and half devoured, chewed travesties of men. All about the bodies and pieces of bodies were swarms of huge footprints, like those of hyenas. Conan came silently upon the pier, approaching the galley above whose deck was suspended something that glimmered ivory white in the faint twilight. Speechless, the Cimmerian looked on the Queen of the Black Coast as she hung from the yardarm of her own galley. Between the yard and her white throat stretched a line of crimson clots that shone like blood in the great light. Those were a nice little necklace that she got in the previous chapter, because that isn't defined here. I really miss reading without braces. I feel like an idiot reading with them, but I can't take them out for the length of the time it takes to stream. Alas, this is my life for the next 6 months. Hopefully it'll be worth it. Part 4. The Attack from the Air. The shadows were black around him. The dripping jaws gaped wide. Thicker than rain, the red drops fell. But my love was fiercer than death's black spell, nor all the iron walls of hell could keep me from his side. The Song of Belit. The jungle was a black colossus that locked the ruin-littered glade in ebon arms. The moon had not risen. The stars were flecks of hot amber in a breathless sky that reeked of death. On the pyramid, among the fallen towers, sat Conan the Cimmerian like an iron statue, chin propped on massive fists. Out in the black shadows, stealthy feet padded and red eyes glimmered. The dead lay as they had fallen, but on the deck of the Tigris, on a pyre of broken benches, spear shafts, and leopard skins, lay the Queen of the Black Coast in her last sleep, wrapped in Conan's scarlet cloak. Like a true queen she lay, with her plunder heaped high about her. Silks, cloth of gold, silver braid, casks of gems and golden coins, silver ingots, jeweled daggers, and teocallis of gold wedges. Maybe that was like some kind of obscure currency. Gold wedges. Alright, I guess so. But of the plunder of the accursed city, only the sullen waters of Zarkiba could tell where Conan had thrown it with a heathen curse. Now he sat grimly on the pyramid, waiting for his unseen foes. The black fury in his soul drove out all fear. What shapes would emerge from the blackness he knew not, nor did he care. He no longer doubted the visions of the Black Lotus. He understood that while waiting for him in the glade, Ngora and his comrades had been terror-stricken by the winged monster swooping upon them from from the sky, and fleeing in blind panic, had fallen over the cliff, all except their chief, who had somehow escaped their fate, though not madness. Meanwhile, or immediately after, or perhaps before, the destruction of those on the riverbank had been accomplished. Conan did not doubt that the slaughter along the river had been a massacre rather than a battle. Already unmanned by their superstitious fears, the gentlemen pirates might well have. I'm tired of saying blacks. It's mentioned this last time that it's a graceless way of describing that group of people because of the ethnic nationalism in the 30s. That's the context that this was written in. The gentlemen pirates might well have died without striking a blow in their own defense when attacked by their inhuman foes. Why he had been spared so long, he did not understand, unless the malign entity which ruled the river meant to keep him alive to torture him with grief and fear. All pointed to a human or superhuman intelligence, the breaking of the water casks to divide their forces, the driving of the gentlemen pirates over the cliff, and the last greatest, the grim jest of the crimson necklace knotted like a hangman's noose about Bolit's white neck. Having apparently saved the Cimmerian for the choicest victim and extracted the last ounce of exquisite mental torture, it was likely that the unknown enemy would conclude the drama by sending him after the other victims. No smile bent Conan's grim lips at the thought, but his eyes were lit with iron laughter. Laughter, that's a cool phrase. The moon rose, striking fire from the Cimmerian's horned helmet. No call awoke the echoes, yet suddenly the night grew tense and the jungle held its breath. Instinctively, Conan loosened the great sword in its sheath. The pyramid on which he rested was four-sided. The side towards the jungle carved in broad steps. In his hand was a Shemite bow, such as Belit had taught her pirates to use. A heap of arrows lay at his feet, feathered ends toward him. As he rested on one knee, something moved in the blackness under the trees. Etched abruptly in the rising moon, Conan saw a darkly blocked out head and shoulders, brutish in outline. And now, from the shadows, dark shapes came silently, swiftly, running low. 20 great spotted hyenas. They're slavering. I don't know which way to pronounce that, because it means like drool coming from their teeth is what I remember. Not like slavering as in capturing people. Their slavering fangs flashed in the moonlight. Their eyes blazed as no true beast's eyes ever blazed. Oh, that sounds like using the word in its own definition with blaze. Anyways, moving on. 20. Then the spears of the pirates had taken their toll on the pack after all. Even as he thought this, Conan drew nock to ear. And at the twang of the string, a flame-eyed shadow bounded high and fell writhing. The rest did not falter. On they came, and like a rain of death among them fell the arrows of the Cimmerian, driven with all the force and accuracy of steely thews, backed by hate hot as the slag heaps of hell. In his berserk fury, he did not miss. The air was filled with feathered destruction, and havoc wrought among the onrushing pack was breathtaking. Less than half of them reached the foot of the pyramid. Others dropped upon the broad steps, glaring down into the blazing eyes. Conan knew these creatures were not beasts. It was not merely in their natural size that he sensed a blasphemous difference. They exuded an aura tangible as the black mist rising from a corpse-littered swamp. By what godless alchemy these beings had been brought into existence, he could not guess, but he knew he faced diabolism, blacker than the well of Skelos. Skelos? Skeletor. Well of Skeletor. Springing to his feet, he bent his bow powerfully and drove his last shaft point blank at a great hairy shape that soared up at his throat. The arrow was a flying beam of moonlight that flashed onward with but a blur in its course. But the werebeast plunged convulsively in midair and crashed headlong, shot through and through. Then the rest were on him, in a nightmare rush of blazing eyes and dripping fangs. His fiercely driven sword shore the first asunder. Then the desperate impact of the others bore him down. He crushed a narrow skull with the pommel of his hilt, feeling the bone splinter and the blood and brains gush over his hand. Then, dropping the sword, useless at such deadly close quarters, he caught at the throats of the two horrors which were ripping and tearing at him in silent fury. A foul, acrid scent almost stifled him. His own sweat blinded him. Only his mail saved him from being ripped to ribbons in an instant. The next, his naked right hand locked on a hairy throat that tore it open. His left hand, missing the throat of the other beast, caught and broke its foreleg. A short yelp, the only cry in that grim battle, it hideously human-like, burst from the maimed beast. At the sick horror of that cry from a bestial throat, Conan involuntarily relaxed his grip. One, blood gushing from its torn jugular, lunged at him in the last spasm of ferocity, and fastened its fangs on his throat. Oh, that's some booba. On this Christian YouTube. Not actually Christian here. It's whatever. Oh, what was the last word? And fastened its fangs on his throat to fall back dead, even as Conan felt the tearing agony of its grip. The other, springing forward on three legs, was slashing at his belly as a wolf slashes, actually rending the links of his mail. Flinging aside the dying beast, Conan grappled the horror and, with a muscular effort that brought a groan from his blood-flecked lips, he heaved upright, gripping the struggling, tearing fiend in his arms. In an instant, he reeled off balance, its fetid breath hot in his nostrils, its jaw snapping at his neck. Then he hurled it from him to crash with bone-splintering force down the marble steps. As he reeled on wide-braced legs, sobbing for breath, the jungle and the moon swimming bloodily in his sight, the thrash of bat wings was loud in his ears. Stooping, he groped for his sword, and swaying upright, braced his feet drunkenly, and heaved the great blade above his head. His head, with both hands, shaking the blood from his eyes as he sought the air above him for his foe. Instead of attack from the air, the pyramid staggered suddenly and awfully beneath his feet. He heard a rumbling crackle, like my voice, and saw the tall column above him wave like a wand. Here we go, get some water. Wave like a wand. There it is. Stung to galvanized life, he bounded far out. His feet hit a step, halfway down, which rocked beneath him, and his next desperate leap carried him clear. But even as the heels hit the earth, with a shattering crash like a breaking mountain, the pyramid crumpled. The column came thundering down in bursting fragments. For a blind, cataclysmic instant, the sky seemed to rain shards of marble. Then a rubble of shattered stone lay whitely under the moon. Conan stirred, throwing off the splinters that half covered him. A glancing blow had knocked off his helmet and momentarily stunned him. Across his legs lay a great piece of the column, pinning him down. He was not sure that his legs were unbroken. His black locks were plastered with sweat. Blood trickled from the wounds on his throat and hands. He hitched up on one arm, struggling with the debris that prisoned him. Then something swept down across the stars and struck the sword near him. Twisting about, he saw it, the winged one. With fearful speed, it was rushing upon him, and in that instant, Conan had only a confused impression of a gigantic, man-like shape hurtling along on bowed and stunted legs, of huge hairy arms outstretching misshapen black-nailed paws, of a malformed head, in whose broad face the only features recognizable as such were a pair of blood-red eyes. It was a thing neither man, beast, nor devil, imbued with characteristics subhuman as well as characteristics superhuman. But Conan had no time for conscious consecutive thought. He threw himself toward his fallen sword, and his clawing fingers missed it by inches. Desperately, he grasped the shard which pinned his legs, and the veins swelled in his temple as he strove to thrust it off him. It gave slowly, But he knew that before he could free himself, that monster would be upon him, and he knew those black taloned hands were death. The headlong rush of the winged one had not wavered. It towered over the prostrate Cimmerian like a black shadow, arms thrown wide, a glimmer of white flashed between it and its victim. In one mad instant she was there, a tense white shape, vibrant with love, fierce as a she-panther's. The dazed Cimmerian saw between him and the onrushing death, her lithe figure shimmering like ivory beneath the moon. He saw the blaze of her dark eyes, the thick cluster of her burnished hair. Her bosom heaved, her red lips were parted. She cried out sharp and ringing as the rings of steel, as she thrust at the winged monster's breast. "Belit!" screamed Conan. She flashed a quick glance at him, and in her dark eyes he saw her love flaming, a naked, elemental thing of raw fire and molten lava. Then she was gone, and the Cimmerian saw only the winged thing, which had staggered back in unwanted fear, arms lifted, as if to fend off attack. And he knew that Belit, in truth, lay on her pyre on the Tigress's deck. In his ears rang her passionate cry, "Were I still in death, and you fighting, for life I would come back from the abyss." With a terrible cry, he heaved upward, hurling the stone aside. The winged one came on again, and Conan sprang to meet it, his veins on fire with madness. The thews started out like cords on his forearms as he swung his greatsword, pivoting on his heel with the force of a sweeping arc. Just above the hips, it caught the hurtling shape, and the knotted legs fell one way, the torso another, as the blade sheared clear through its hairy body. "Leave that bastard in twain!" "Rock on, Conan!" Conan stood in the moonlit silence, the dripping sword sagging in his hand, staring down at the remnants of his enemy. The red eyes glared up at him with awful life, then glazed and set. The great hands nodded spasmodically and stiffened, and the oldest race in the world was extinct. Would have been species, because it was made clear that it was not on the same branch as humanity. Nitpicking. Conan lifted his head, mechanically searching for the beast things that had been its slaves and executioners. Water. There we go. Executioners, there we go. None met his gaze. The bodies he saw littering the moon-splashed grass were of men, not beasts, hawk-faced, dark-skinned men, naked, transfixed by arrows or mangled by his sword strokes, and they were crumbling into dust before his eyes. Why had not the winged master come to the aid of its slaves when he struggled with them? Had it feared to come within reach of fangs that might turn and rend it? Craft and caution had lurked in that misshapen skull, but had not availed in the end. Turning on his heel, the Cimmerian strode down the rotting wharfs and stepped aboard the galley. A few strokes of his sword cut her adrift, and he went on to the sweep head. Maybe that means like the helm. The Tigress rocked slowly in the sullen water, sliding out sluggishly toward the middle of the river, until the broad current caught her. Conan leaned on the sweep, his somber gaze fixed on the cloak-wrapped shape that lay in state on the pyre, the richness of which was equal to the ransom of an empress. I just noticed that cutting the monster in twain was foreshadowed back in the boarding action in the start of the story. That's neat. Part 5, the funeral pyre. Now we are done with roaming evermore. No more the oars, the windy harp's refrain, nor crimson pennon frights the dusky shore. Blue girdle of the world, receive again her whom thou gavest me. I get what that poem means. Not a fan. See? I couldn't do better. Just not a fan of that one in particular. Again, dawn tinged the ocean. A redder glow lit the river mouth. Conan of Cimmeria leaned on his greatsword upon the white beach, watching the Tigress swinging out on her last voyage. There was no light in his eyes that contemplated the glassy swells. Out of the rolling blue wastes, all glory and wonder had gone. A fierce revulsion shook him as he gazed at the green surges that deepened into purple hazes of mystery. Belit had been of the sea. She had lent its splendor and allure. Without her, it rolled a barren, dreary, and desolate waste from pole to pole. She belonged to the sea. To its everlasting mystery he returned her. He could do no more. For himself, its glittering blue splendor was more repellent than the leafy fronds, which rustled and whispered behind him of vast mysterious wilds beyond them, and into which he must plunge. No hand was at the sweep of the tigress, no oars drove her through the green water, but a clean tanging wind bellied her silken sail, and as a wild swan cleaves the sky to her nest, she sped seaward, flames mounting higher and higher from her deck to lick at the mast and envelop the figure that lay wrapped in scarlet on the shining pyre. So passed the queen of the Black Coast, and leaning on his red-stained sword, Conan stood silently until the red glow had faded far out and the blue hazes of dawn splashed its roses and gold over the ocean. That was Queen of the Black Coast. That was one of the funner, more formulaic Conan stories, I think. It had most of its action front-loaded with the pirate boarding action, and that was pretty awesome. I also really liked the cosmic trip that Conan went on when he was drugged by the Black Lotus. There's similar elements in a lot of the other Middle Conan formulaic stories, but I think this one is like the shortest and sweetest of them. Besides the racism, and the first one had some awkward misogyny between Conan and Belit. But this is a good one, all things considered. I think next week, I'm tempted to read one that's also really cool with the cosmic stuff. That also has some of the best action where Conan just gets beat out of him. But it has, I think, the most annoying token female sidekick in all the Middle Conan stories. And I don't know if I really want to read that out loud because it's not even demeaning. It's just poorly written. Her dialogue is. Yeah. This only took us about a half hour to finish this story. So, in other news, I just finished the Death in the End, Volume 1 of the Horse Heresy in 40K. That was a great audiobook. It took me a few weeks because I had some breaks from it, but really loved it at the end. I especially loved how at the end it talks about the temporal mechanics in great clarity of the warp and immaterium, which actually, what's the channel's name? Luetin? Luetin. I think there's a number on the name. But his YouTube channel, in the past few years, he's done some lore videos describing how he thinks that logically the immaterium and the warp and chaos have to work as timeless dimensions to accommodate how 40K works mechanically. And it's actually really cool how basically everything he said, Dan Abnett apparently agrees. I don't know if Dan Abnett watched Luton's back lore building videos about it. It's possible. I kind of doubt it. I think this is more like Luton just made logical arguments and analysis and synthesis of how logically the warp has to work and just got it right, which is really cool to see of a fan channel like that. Besides that, I started on my drive home. What's the name of it? It's one of the Grey Knight books. Let me bring it up. Audible. The Emperor's Gift. It starts off really cool with the indoctrination of a neophyte, I guess you would call it. A neophyte Grey Knight going through his mind wiping to become a Grey Knight and erase his name and his memory of his past. And that's a really cool sequence. It's also really cool, a humanizing aspect that was surprising to me, because usually the community joke is that Space Marines are hyper neurodivergent and incredibly awkward. And this one really humanized it, which was interesting. It's possible that's not lore accurate necessarily, but it is canon that there are, ironically, a spectrum of how human the Space Marines are from chapter to chapter. It is surprising that the Grey Knight, he was humanized so much, because I wouldn't think they would be, just because of their nature of being mind wiped and trained to fight demons. In case you don't know, the Grey Knights are basically the Space Marine chapter that specialize in fighting demons specifically. But I've only finished the prologue and got a little bit into the very first chapter, so I can't say much more because I don't know anymore. I am really looking forward to Volume 2 of The Death in the End, but I have no idea when that's going to come out, because I think The Death in the End Volume 1 just came out this past year at some time, I think. So probably going to have a wait on that. I mentioned this on one of the world building videos, map making things I did before, one of those streams, that First Into Death is my entry point into the Horus Heresy series of books, which is funny because it's such a monolithic series. I've never wanted to get into it, despite being a really big 40k fan and into the lore heavily as a GM of the RPGs, especially Dark Heresy 1 and 2. But I ironically find that despite the Death in the End being, I think it's the 8th part of the Siege of Terra, which itself is like, I'm sure there's dozens upon dozens of parts of the Horus Heresy, and this is at the very end. But it's funny to me that it's like a really great entry point to the Horus Heresy, despite being at the end. And that's because there's no real spoiler in how the Horus Heresy ends, because it's all backstory for 40k, because this is 30k. So it's cool. It's a fun little thing. But that's a quick catch up on the reading I've done lately. I've tried to start the next Conan story for me, which is, let me go back to the, oh, I can actually get back to the corner. Go back to the table of contents. It is the Devil in Iron, or People of the Black Circle. I think the Devil in the Iron is the one that I've stalled out on, because the opening is just so exposition heavy, and clumsily so, with politics that aren't relevant at all to what's going on. It might be People of the Black Circle, I don't remember. Either way. But that's going to be it for tonight. A little shorter stream, because I think this is the same amount of pages as the first part, but got through it faster. Either way. I am working through the holiday weekend, which means a 12-hour shift for me on Monday, which means when I get home, I'm not going to be in any condition to stream. So next week, I will see everyone on Tuesday at the usual time of 1:30 at night, technically Wednesday morning. But I'm thinking that I'll just shift forward and do same schedule, but move Monday's world building stream to Friday next week. That'll work, yeah. All right, see everyone Tuesday for another Conan. I'll figure out which one then. We're on the table of contents. Let's see what we got. We read Phoenix on the Sword. Also a tangent, because this story we just finished talked about necromancy. That is a element in which one of these? I think it's the Red Shadows and Rattle of Bones. These two are Solomon Kane. Is that the name of it? It's something like Solomon Kane, some kind of name like that. That was written by Robert E. Howard before Conan, and it's about a fictional, was it 19th century African colonization era, where it has to deal with an asshole. I don't even remember what he does there, but it's I think Solomon Kane is the asshole main character. There is a werewolf that is apparently the good guy, and then there's some necromancy, witch doctorism, because that was the 1930s American understanding of colonial Africa, I guess. I haven't read him because I just don't give a shit about that stuff. I'm just here in this book for Conan. But it is what it is. But I was looking at which story I might read next week. Phoenix on the Sword we read. Arlet Settle we read. Tiger Elephant we read. Black Colossus. Which one was that? Booba. Gideon's. I remember. That one is just kind of mid to me. So let's get Black Colossus. Slithering Shadow. Maybe, I don't remember which one that is. I think Shadows in the Moonlight was good, if that's the one I remember right. Maybe Gods of the North, but that's a little bit too crass for YouTube. A little bit, just a little. It is cool though. All of these, this is a public domain, by the way. I got this PDF for free online. You can go download it. Not even in Minecraft. It's just free if you Google search Conan copyright free or something like that. You'll find this PDF to download. But yeah, I'll figure out what book we're reading next week, or which story, not book. But see you all Tuesday. Have a fantastic Friday, everyone.